In 1970, the political ferment which the Vietnam War generated in the US and the subsequent awakening of the civil rights and the women's movement were profoundly influential in provoking my reconsideration of representation as a viable expressive tool. My focus on the nude brought me into direct confrontation with the role of women in art of the past. I needed to find a way to use the nude in a contemporary context. The first pictures focused on sexuality. The carnal nature of pain seemed to me a perfect metaphor. The specifics of image a necessary elaboration. I wanted to avoid sentimentality, but allow for intimacy and sensuality. The fundamental problem of subject and object was always present, and I began to use my own body as one method of dealing with it. How one relates to the changing role of the body when young, middle-aged, or old, and how one steps into those roles comes into play. The prism of the self-view thus serves to focus on the social and psychological aspects of gender and age. My work has developed in a serial way. Each series would occupy me for several years and consist of 10 to 30 paintings which were consistent in content and style. I have used both the mirror and the camera as strategies with which to destabilize the point of view and to engage the viewer as participant. My ongoing interest has always been in both process and relevance. We chose to plan this exhibition in a kind of circular form, which is not so usual in terms of sequencing an exhibition. That's because much of the late work really touches back to some of the issues in the very early abstract paintings. And here, for instance, is one of the very late pieces called Seated in Red. And obviously the color is a very primary part of what this painting is about. It also uses the rear of the figure, which is not used hardly in any other pieces. This is another one of the paintings from this very late period. It's called Diptych on the Couch, or Couch Diptych, I'm not whatsoever. And it's one of the few where I had used two images of the same body. And it's the only one, I think, where I have a really black background, which I liked the whole idea of that total black that was able to silhouette the flesh of the bodies. And one image is of women in a kind of seductive pose, whereas the other plays off of the seductive pose by showing a very defensive kind of position. My early work was in abstract expressionism at the time that I was in Spain. And this is one of the examples of approximately 30 to 60 paintings that I had during that time and was well known in that period in Europe and in South America. The abstraction changed over the years, and this painting is an example of one of the latest of those works. When I left abstraction, I moved into the sexual paintings, as I felt that they were a perfect way to utilize the nude in a contemporary setting. The gesture is taken straight from my abstract paintings. I use the brush in a free-flowing, dynamic way, but I use the figure as a structural form that supported that kind of agitation. The first figurative paintings that I did were the sex paintings. And the first of the sex paintings, I used the high gesture that I had used in the abstract work and a completely abstract color. So it was a transition from abstraction into figuration. I did one series of sexual work that used the brush in the abstract manner. But from there, I started to work from photographs rather than from drawings. And the photographs led me toward working much more realistically. So these sexual pictures were the place where I moved back into high realism. This piece was done for a political show that my dealer was doing. It was called A Patriotic Show. It was in the year 1976, which was the bicentennial year. And it was a show of critical art about the US at that time. I wanted to be in the show because my work, I felt, was political, but he couldn't deal with showing a nude in part of the political show. He said, "How will it look political?" So I said, "I'll paint you a diagram," and took the centerpiece I made for this show of one of my realist self-images where you see my body from my own point of view. And then on either side, I placed one panel of a Playboy image and one panel of a parody of a de Kooning woman painting, and called it Mythologies and Me. In all of the pictures that were of myself in the realist mode, I took the image from my own point of view so that the head was not seen, but what was seen was the body as it would be if you, the viewer, were the head. This picture is one where I collaged one female and one male in that same self-image kind of appearance, each one with its own disappearing point, because what I was stressing was the possibility of intimacy while maintaining autonomy. And that is how the painting is titled. These three paintings are a group of paintings which reflect my own personal life. One is the painting of my father, and the other is a painting of the man I was with at the time. And the center one is a picture of myself sitting on a couch, holding the image from which I took the image of my father, and with the painting of the man I was with in the background. I called it self-image on the couch. I felt that that was a wonderful way of showing a woman artist in the patriarchy. I did a whole series of works in the gymnasium and the locker room because I was using them at that time, and it seemed very interesting to me the way the whole environment was like a castle of mirrors, and everybody existed independently of each other, but just in a dialogue with themselves in the mirror. When I did the pictures in the mirror, I accidentally got myself in the mirror also, and myself with the camera, and myself doubled. So all of those things were really interesting as devices in which I pulled the viewer into the scene. If I was pointing the camera at the mirror, I was also pointing the camera at the viewer. So the viewer was looking at me in the painting, but I was looking at him. After the gymnasium pictures, I worked on the whole series of mannequins. I was interested in the way the mannequin looked like a live woman, but of course wasn't. So the mannequin pictures represented to me the mass production of what the desirable female image should be. These paintings were made in two different times. The underpainting were from some of the series of the realist sex paintings, which I had done in the 70s. And at this time, the time that I went back to them, it seemed that no one was ever going to look at the sex paintings again. So I decided to use some of the drawings that I had from the locker room paintings and use them superimposed over the sexual pieces. That gave me a whole sense of movement in time that was interesting because it played on the possibility of memory, of having one image in one's head, another one in front of one. And so I liked the kind of reverberations that were set off. After I discovered using the camera in the painting gave it a whole kind of almost aggressive connection to the viewer, I decided to do a whole group of paintings that I called With Camera. And here you see several, some of which where the camera shows the flash, which gave me the opportunity to abstract things somewhat to compensate for the flash, and others where I used the mirror as a framing device, and you could see the mirror, the beveled edge of the mirror, which I painted very realistically, so that it also talked about how the image that we have of ourselves is always artificial. It's always framed by external forces. I started becoming interested in transparencies, both in the paint and in the kind of fabrics that were seen. I did several overlays where I overlaid one image over another and had some of them transparent so that you could see them in motion rather than static. This wall features 3 important pieces, each from a different series. The centerpiece here is a painting called Disappearing. It is done from a photograph that was blurred, and in that way I got this kind of strange image that moves. The painting on the left is one called From the Echoing Images, and it has one image sent in the center that is painted realistically from the photograph, whereas the larger image moves out into an almost totally abstract space. The painting on the right is one of the classic self-images where my body moves out into the space of the viewer, and the viewer becomes the head of the body. The outsize scale of this 5-panel piece was created for a show at Basel in Switzerland. It was a show that featured extra large work. And for me, it was very significant because I was able to show in it various stages of my sense of myself as a body, and the body moving through time. It spoke to my image of myself in the various ways that I've used it and came together in this one piece. Even after so many years working as an artist, here I am still with my skin in the game.